Welcome to another riveting edition of the GIBS Podcast. My name is Janine Jellars, author and proud GIBS alum. I have the pleasure of being joined by one of Africa's most dynamic leaders. The CEO of MTN Benin is joining me in studio today, Uche Ofedile. Uche's leadership journey has taken her across some of the most dynamic markets in Africa. Currently, as CEO of MTN Benin and chairperson of MoMo Benin, Uche leads one of West Africa's most dynamic telecom and fintech operations. Her earlier roles in Ghana, the DRC, and Liberia solidified a reputation for clarity, directness, and the ability to transform businesses in some of the most challenging environments. Uche has led large teams, shaped commercial strategy, stabilized markets, and delivered growth in contexts where leadership is as much internal as it is operational. Uche's impact moves far beyond the boardroom into the core systems that modern leaders need: identity, pressure, recovery, and steady presence. Through platforms like Beneath the Smile, the Leadership Infrastructure Framework, and her podcast, Don't Let the Smile Fool You, she creates essential tools and conversations that equip leaders to operate with greater strength, truth, and intention. Uche is now stepping into a new season of her career, having just published a book that really touched me on my studio, Beneath the Smile Leadership Infrastructure, which we are here to discuss today, and expanding the leadership infrastructure tools and broader leadership frameworks, and scaling her innovative program, CEO of the Day, into a regional and global platform. Please join me in welcoming Uche to GIBS. Welcome to GIBS. It is so great to have you in the hot seat with me today. How are you doing?
Not the hot seat, Janine.
And the seat will be hot.
No, but thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, and it feels wonderful to visit the GIBS campus. This is great. One of the leading business schools across Africa. I'm really proud to be here today.
We are so happy to have you, and I think it's such an opportune time to discuss your book. But before we get into that, you are a woman who wears many hats. You are a CEO, you are a podcaster, you write books. What is the golden thread that ties all your initiatives together?
Yeah, I think as a CEO, it's a lived experience, right? So every day you are being a leader, every day. The podcast digs deeper to understand what is going on behind that leadership. And I'll talk about that, I'm sure, later. But one of the things that I've always dealt with is, people come up to me and they're like, "You're always smiling." And then I'm like, if only you know what's behind the smile, right? So the podcast digs a bit deeper into what does it take for you to sustain yourself as a leader, which led me to the book, which is, I am a CEO. I live the experience of being a leader every day. On my podcast, I talk about what does it take, and the book really explores that much more deeply to say, actually, it's not about sheer will and resilience, that there are things that have to be built in order for you to maintain success over a long period of time. And here are the ways that you can go about that. So this is what connects the dots.
Yeah.
It's really about being very passionate around women leadership and ensuring that they're building themselves to become successful leaders in the long run.
100%. And you just spoke briefly now about the smile element. The title of this book is so intentional and it's so disarming, Beneath the Smile. Can you talk a little bit about what exactly inspired this? Because you do have a beautiful smile. What lurks beneath?
Yeah, I think the thing that is quite interesting for me is there's so many assumptions, especially for women. I mean, one of the things I had to teach myself very early on, and I coached women around that as well, is like, don't show your teeth too much. People make assumptions around you smiling. And I even remember once I went for a meeting. This is a long time ago. I went for a meeting with a potential client, and he called my boss at the time back, and he said, "Wow, she's kind of smart. I didn't realize she was so smart. She's always smiling." So there's that aspect of it, which is, don't get it twisted, right? I'm a serious leader. But the other part of it is leadership is hard. Whether you're a vice president or a CEO, that comes with this pendulum that swings from day to day.
Yeah.
You could walk into the office today and you could be talking to your grad execs, young people in the organization. to you can get a regulatory decision that's really difficult, to competition in the market. So, every day you're kind of going back and forth through joy, anger, happiness, and you can imagine that over a long period of time, takes away from you. And you have to figure out how you show up every day, no matter what's going on, whether it's good, whether it's bad. You have to come into the organization, and people have to have confidence in the fact that things are fine, or things are going to be fine. And a lot of times people see that and they assume that the job is easy, that there isn't anything going on in the background. And that's why I say, there's a lot going on behind the smile, beneath the smile. And I want to talk about that, and I want people to understand that, especially for women who are aspiring to become leaders, so they know and they're making a decision around that. And for women who are already in leadership, saying, actually, I can deal with this differently going forward.
I think it's such an important conversation to normalize the emotional element as well, the toll that emotional regulation can take on women leaders especially. And I think so many women leaders step into leadership and have preconceived notions about what leaders should or should not do, how leaders do or do not show up. I just also want to touch on the concept of leadership infrastructure. This is the first time I've seen anyone articulate the kind of foundation of leadership in this specific way. What made you choose infrastructure as the metaphor for Beneath the Smile?
Maybe because I'm in telco. I don't know. But I think the fact of the matter and the way that I looked at it, especially having lived the experience and I continue to live it, is that there's so many layers that you have to build to sustain. You can't avoid it. I was talking to a friend of mine, a few years ago, and I was complaining about, the loneliness of the CEO job. And we talked about that, and I said, actually, you know what? It doesn't need to be. We all talk about this. I promise you, if you talk to any leader, they talk about the loneliness of the job. And I kind of wrote this book to challenge that a little bit, to say it doesn't have to be, that you can build the infrastructure. And, we look at your leadership or your ability to lead as a house, and we say, what are the things that are important for you to sustain leadership in a way that is seen as successful? You have to have support. Right? You have to have the right foundation. What do I mean by that? You have to eat properly. You have to exercise. You know what I mean? You have to rest. You have to continue to be curious as a leader. These are not concepts that are new, right? But it's the idea of stacking them and making sure that you're paying attention to each of these things, right? So you have to continue to learn. You don't expect the organization to grow you. You grow yourself, right? You have to do those things and make sure that you're not performing leadership. So this is your point earlier, which is, a lot of times as women, we have this notion of what leadership should look like. I have to be tough and I have to, wear suits or whatever it is. We have this preconceived notion of what leadership should look like. But actually, if you build your infrastructure, your presence is built, right? You don't have to perform it, because performing is exhausting, right? So you show up authentically. I hate this word, but I will use it, authentically. And then I think the last point, which is the most important one, is what I call the basement. And this is where all the terrible things sit, right? So, grief, disappointment, the promotion you didn't get, your partner that you lost, things not going your way, failure, they're all sitting in there. And you have to deal with it. You can't pretend that they don't exist, because they eventually come up into how you lead. So that's why I thought about it as infrastructure. Like, how do you build these levels and layers that allow you to sustain? And you're not humming at 100% at any given time. There's always one area that's a bit cracked, and you have to go back and fix that so that you can continue to lead.
They are obviously trade-offs, right?
Of course.
I'm just thinking about my journey as a former GIBS student, and the first years, because it's a 2-year MBA program, the first years come in with such confidence, vim and vigor until this building breaks you down. But I just want to reflect on how I would have received this message coming into this program. So many people come in and say, I'm already successful. I'm already, I've been pinned as the star at my organization. I'm running my own business. But they don't know what they don't know. Right? So what would you say to that person who's coming in here with the confidence at 1,000? What would you say to that leader about why they should pick this book up and go through the steps of this infrastructure?
Success is not without subsidy. At the end of the day, your success today does not guarantee sustainability. And that's one of the toughest lessons I've had to learn. I've had great successes in my career, but behind the scenes, there was a lot going on. I write in the book about working in Liberia, one of my toughest turnarounds and very successful. But at night, what I was doing was watching Frasier every single night. And for those of you who can understand this, I was watching that because I couldn't go to sleep.
Yeah.
Right? There was so much noise in my head about everything that was going on in the organization and my fear of failing. That I was going to work like, hey guys,
we've got it.
We got this. Don't worry. We're going to turn this business around, rah, 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 doing all the right things, making all the right hires. At night, as soon as I clocked into my room, Frasier, just so that I could quiet the noise, I could stop worrying, I could, and you can imagine for a leader that insomnia, not going to sleep, it's not sustainable. Like, no matter, your sheer will and want to succeed will not be enough to carry you if you're not sleeping. So I think that's the idea, which is you can be a star, you can be successful. Do you want to be a star for a long time? Do you want your success to be sustainable? Then you have to make sure that you're built for that. And that's what the book really teaches you how to do.
Yeah. You are praised in the organization being MTN, for that authenticity, for the way you show up, your presence, right? You've also just touched on the concept of performing leadership. What is the difference to you between performing leadership and being present as a leader? Because that's quite a tricky distinction.
I'll give you a really small example. A couple of years ago, I walked in. So I have a reputation of being very high energy. In my organization, they're like, we can't keep up. You need to calm down. So this is my perception of myself. And I remember walking into a meeting, and I was told in that meeting, like, oh my goodness, you're coming across as very low energy. Like, are you okay? And I was a bit taken aback because no one's ever told me that I'm a low energy person. And so the following day, I had a meeting, and I walk in there and I was like, good morning, everyone. How are you? How is everyone today? And after that, they were like, oh, that was great. And I was thinking to myself, like, by the way, after that meeting, I had to go to bed. Because, for 2 hours, you were performing. I was on. And it wasn't on in a way that was real. I was like being an exaggerated version of myself. That's not sustainable. And so what I'm saying to people is like, at some point, when you have the right level of support, when you are rested, you have your successes behind you, because we are talking about successful people now, right? And you're very clear about who you are. You don't feel a need to do that, right? You understand the values of your organization. You understand how you must show up, but you don't feel a need to be performative about it. And I think, being a performer is exhausting. Yeah. And again, not sustainable. And leadership infrastructure, as I said, is always around the sustainability of you as a leader, the sustainability of your success. So it's okay. I mean, we are all in situations from time to time where we have to perform. Yeah. Of course. But it's certainly not a strategy, and it's not sustainable. And so that's what I mean by the difference of performing versus being yourself, being present. I do think that there are ways that you can showcase authenticity not in this way that everyone talks about it, like you're in the office, you're at work, there's a certain way that you're expected to behave. So you can't bring your nightclub self to the office. That's not what I'm
Your
talking
girls'
about.
night self.
Yeah, right? But there has to be a way in which you show up, which you can live with, right? Every day, and doesn't make you feel like, you're tired and you're exhausted. And that's what I'm sort of speaking to.
Yeah.
In that space, yeah.
100%. And I mean, you mentioned that example for yourself, right? And I'm just thinking, in your title, there are a few things. Telecoms, fintech, West Africa. You are a high energy person, but the market's demanding, the industry in which you play, the sectors are incredibly demanding and dynamic. We all see the successes, the headlines, the opportunities that exist in that space, right? How do you sustain your leadership infrastructure as you are going through your day-to-day and showing up, being present, not performing?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And I have to be very honest, I'm not perfect at all, Even recently, I will share this story with you. My parents were visiting with me from the States, and they were with me for a couple of months. And they happened to be with me at a time when there was a lot of, stuff going on in our sector. And initially, when I was coming home, I was telling my parents the stories about what was going on, and they were very horrified. They were like, "Oh my God, my daughter is going through a tough time." And so I had to switch from that to coming back home and saying, "Oh yeah, things are great, things are fine." So back to the performing, right? But the good part of my parents being there is the support.
Yeah.
Right? And so my point is, we are in these markets, which makes the concept of leadership infrastructure actually much more important.
Yes.
Because every single day is a different day. You don't know what you're going to wake up to, what decision, has been taken for your organization, the level of competition in our markets, the fact that you have to be very dynamic about strategy. You are responsible for an organization of people at the end of the day. And it's a responsibility that I take to heart, You're shaping future leaders for the country that you are working in as well. And so you have to, in order for you to maintain that energy level that I'm speaking about, you have to have the right level of support. I have, friends who come in from Lagos and they spend, weekends with me, and I find great comfort in that, because in that space I can be myself, I can talk about the issues that I'm having, and they sort of feed me during that 2-day period. Or recovery, which is, I will take time out now. I wouldn't do it before, but just recently I had a staycation at a hotel recently. Or how do I continue to learn? AI is something that is of huge interest to me. Of course, it must be. And I recently decided to take a course, self-funded, at the Wharton School, Business School, in order to understand it and understand how it's shaping the future for our company, for our employees, and ultimately how, our company will help contribute to the country as well. So again, you have to do all of those things if you want to be a really successful leader. I don't see these conversations as soft.
Yes.
And I think it's really important, especially for the audience, to understand that this conversation is not a soft conversation. People who are coming to GIBS, they've chosen this school because they want to be successful, or they want to build on the successes that they've had. Leadership infrastructure will be a key part of that success story. Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
I want to switch tack a little bit and
Okay.
get a bit vulnerable.
Good.
You mentioned the basement a little earlier, and the basement is where, the mold grows. It's dank, it's dark.
Nobody wants to go in the basement.
Nobody wants to go in there. And the basement is all the things that leaders you want to suppress, you don't want to talk about, you think it doesn't affect your day-to-day or how you show up. You specifically spoke about your own journey with grief, having lost your husband at the young age of 34. My first question when I came to that part of the book was, this is the vulnerability that you displayed, the trust you have in your audience and yourself to share that story. What informed the decision for you to touch on your grief journey in this book?
Look, I think as African women, we are taught not to do that.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. I do think that sharing your stories, not the good stories, because I think we're very good at that, you know? So I worked hard, I was promoted, I worked hard again, I was promoted. We've heard this story many times. What people are hungry for and they need to see from us as African women is the truth. What shaped you to get here? It wasn't just your hard work. It wasn't just that you were smart in school. There were all sorts of elements that brought you to this point. For me, one of those big crossroads was the death of my husband. I was 34. I had just moved to Nigeria. He was diagnosed with cancer. And then we went through this 18-month period of, trying to find a way to help him recover. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. Now, you can imagine at that point in time, I was at a crossroad. Do I stay in Nigeria? Do I move back to the US where I grew up? And I made what I thought at the time was a very bold choice. I decided to stay in Nigeria and continue working. Why did I do that? I wanted to be considered as a strong woman. Like, nothing can hold me back. I'm still working. I'm still, I'm still here. But the reality of it is that I decided to stay in Nigeria. And by the way, it was a fantastic decision. Of course, the story afterwards tells itself. But for 2 years after that, I made a series of terrible decisions.
Yeah.
So again, not dealing with the grief comes out somehow. What did I do? I decided, not even a couple of months after we buried my husband, that I didn't want to work for the company I was working for any longer. I was like, I want to change, I need a change. And I decided to join a startup, what would be considered a startup. It failed. Went to another startup. That failed. And at the time, I didn't see it as poor decision making. I just thought, I need a change. But the reality was, I hadn't dealt with what had happened to me. And I was so caught up in trying to look like, you know what? I'm a strong person. I need to be a CMO by the age of 30-something and chasing that as opposed to really dealing with what was going on with me. And I was lucky, by the way, that my career didn't suffer for it.
Yeah.
So this is the point. You could be dealing with loss. For some people, it could be a professional loss, right? What happens when you don't get the promotion that you want? How do you deal with it? Some people are enraged by it, How do they lead after that?
They make emotional decisions,
they make emotional decisions. You see what I mean? If you don't deal with it, it shows up. There is no, I'm just going to, I'm strong enough to overcome it, right? It shows up in the way that you decide, in the way that you lead your team, in the strategic decisions you make for your organization, in what you don't do and what you do choose to do. And so the basement is really important. And I really, as I said, when you asked the question, as African women, we are not taught to share our failures or our losses. But I really believe that being open about that is a way that we can show others that it's okay to fail, that your loss does not define you. Actually, if you deal with it, you can become a much more empathetic and a much stronger leader.
As you said, what begins in the basement doesn't
stay there at all.
And I think so many of us are not good at kind of excavating what's in the basement or clearing the basement, right? So let's talk about the steps of the infrastructure. Okay. So you've spoken about the support, you've spoken about the foundations. Often as leaders, we love to think of ourselves as unicorns. I'm one of one, no one else can do what I do. Yeah. So we become islands. You spoke about the loneliness of being in the CEO seat, but then you specifically call out your support structure in this. You call them your laughing jackasses, your friendship circle, right? But let's talk about support because I feel we need to break this myth that in order to be seen as exceptional, you need to always go alone, be unique, be one of one. What does support mean tangibly, and what kind of steps can we all take to build our support?
Look, I mean, I always try to bring things back to a very personal level, right? I mean, you're not born alone, okay? As in your mother gave birth to you and all of that. If you are within some sort of family structure, like all your life, you're not in isolation. So why as a leader would you be? It's not natural. And we are taught, particularly as women, by the way, because I have to be very honest, the men don't do this. The men have great infrastructure.
Yeah.
They have their colleagues, sometimes they go golfing or maybe they go for drinks or whatever it is that they do, and they discuss business. They talk about their failures without fear. I remember when I was working in Ghana, there was an issue in one of the departments, and the leader of that department, he was like, yeah, we have this problem. And I used to say to myself, like, oh my goodness, if it were me, I'd be like, hiding, and so there's a very different way that they deal with leadership. And I'm saying to women and other leaders, by the way, that support is really important. You get to define what your support should look like. For me, it's my friend circle. For other people, it might be an executive coach, right? What you need is that space where you can speak openly about what's going on and think through what you need to do going forward. So some other people, it's a therapist. I have friends who it's their prayer circle. You get to define, but you need it. You cannot walk through life leading by yourself. Because at the end of the day, particularly for CEOs or, any team leader, you don't have the benefit of going to your team to say, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You can't. You cannot do that, right? But you are expected to have answers, right? So build the infrastructure around you that allows you to think through what those answers should be without shame, without worry, That's why I ask the question, who is it that you can be unimpressive with, right? Who is that person that without all the accolades, the titles, you can just be yourself and think through the things that you need to decide, as a leader. Yeah.
That is the line I felt probably most called out by. Who do you trust enough to be unimpressive?
Yeah.
Because I think it speaks to so many things about how we show up, I also want to talk about the emphasis you place on getting yourself ready. The investments you make into your own development. You spoke in the book, you speak about a course that you put yourself through. And again, you touched on the Wharton AI leadership course. People who are watching this, people part of the GIBS community are no strangers to self-development. But what is the importance, do you feel, of just pushing yourself to keep being a lifelong learner?
Yeah. I mean, the world is changing so quickly that, curiosity really has to be a superpower. There's no choice around this. And in the book, I talk about the fact that, when I was taking this course at Columbia in preparation for the marketing director job, it was less about the content, but more about the psychological preparation. Walking in through the door on day one, knowing that I had prepared. That was the biggest takeaway for myself at that time. So I think that's really important, especially in a world where technology is changing so quickly. And it doesn't have to be something as lofty as the AI course. You should just be a curious leader. For example, I remember I asked I had a meeting with some of the employees and I was saying to them, okay, TikTok is one of the fastest growing websites in Benin right now. How many of you are on it? By the way, I was not either, okay? But in the room, only 2 people raised their hand. Like they had the app on their phones. And I said, okay, if I open up the app, when last have you actually used it? Why was I talking about TikTok? Because, our country is a country where the average age is 18.
Wow.
So how can we build solutions for people that we don't understand in terms of their behaviors and their usage and patterns? So that's what I mean. Like, you have to be a lifelong learner, especially if you want to be in leadership, because you need to understand what's happening around you. You have to understand the new technologies coming up, how it affects your customer, how it affects your business. What are your employees doing? Why did I take the AI course? Apart from the fact that it was very important to do, but I will be very honest about what triggered it. I walked out of my office one day, and one of my grad execs, I don't know, she must be like 21 or 22, was building a presentation on ChatGPT. This was a couple of years ago. And here we were in the organization still trying to, sort of build our strategy around AI. And here she is fluently using one of the AI tools. And I said, okay, no, we need to get ahead of this, right?
Cannot let this 21-year-old beat me.
You know what I mean? Like, we need to get ahead of this. So you need to be ahead. You need to be able to understand what's going on around you. And I think you want to be confident in the rooms that you're in, right? That you're knowledgeable and you have a sense. You don't have to know it deeply. You're not an engineer, perhaps, but you have to be knowledgeable. And that requires a commitment to lifelong learning and curiosity. Yeah.
We spoke briefly before the cameras rolled about the pressure that a lot of women leaders feel about not just being ready, but about being 150% ready. We are never ready enough. We feel we need to have the MBA. No, the MBA is not enough. I need the PhD to kind of credential myself, to prove myself as a leader. Where do you draw the line between that kind of psychological or emotional, that feeling of readiness, okay, cool, I know enough, and kind of pushing yourself too far into, procrastinating in the name of readiness?
No, that's such a great question. I think, look, at the end of the day, if you are a lifelong learner, you have this sort of insatiable need to continue to better yourself. And I think that that's not a bad thing. But what I don't want people to do is to say, I'm not good enough, which is the point you're making. There's so many roles, and I will use my own organization as an example, where I see women hesitate to apply for things because I don't tick every box on JD. Well, let me be really clear with you. The JD doesn't even describe half of the stuff that you're going to be expected to do. So don't let that be the thing that stops you. We need to understand that we must continue to try. When I was applying for the marketing director job that I spoke about, I remember reaching out to my former boss at KPMG, right? And I sent her the JD and my resume, and I said to her, like, exactly what you're saying. I don't think I'm ready. And she was just like,
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? You look at a JD, you look at the work you've done, you look at the successes. This is, again, why you need to have good infrastructure in place, because you need people around you who are going to tell you, like, nah, go for that, right? You look at your lifelong learning, and you understand that you're ready, which is why the idea of making sure this infrastructure in place and having presence gives you a level of confidence that cannot be taught. There are jobs that you should always say to yourself, like, you know what, I'm going to try. I only have 40% of what they're asking for, but I'm going to try. It doesn't matter. The interview gives you lots of things to learn from, even if you're not successful in the process, right? That process prepares you for that next opportunity. But I want women to try. The JD doesn't tell the whole story of what's expected. There's soft skills that you're bringing to the table that people cannot necessarily
It's not
feel,
tangible.
right? Or not, clear on paper. So if you are in a role and this is about the next step, try.
Go for it.
Try. Don't bother trying to navigate through the JD. Try. Try again and try again and try again. Please. This is the most important thing I can tell people. Do not be discouraged by a piece of paper. Do not be discouraged by a piece of paper. You know, I have women who say to me, like, I don't have my MBA, so what? Like, if I look at some of the CEOs, you know, some of them don't have MBAs. What they do have is executive training. They've probably done some sort of advanced management program. They've constantly learned. They've been on projects.
They have the infrastructure,
They have the
mentors.
infrastructure. They have the mentors. You see what I mean? So, you know, please.
Just go for it.
But for some people, there's this thing of, I need to have this MBA. And if that's you, do it. One of my closest friends had been a CFO for a very long time. And she was obsessed about not having her MBA. And for her, that was like a psychological thing. And she finally did it and ticked the box. I don't think it made her any worse or any better. She was a great CFO. She still is. But for her, that was an important thing to do. So she did it. And if that's you, then please do that. But again, don't feel discouraged by a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Please try.
And speaking about that readiness, you have an incredible initiative where you put women, young leaders, into the CEO seat, as in, this is not a picture opportunity. No. This is not an ad. You literally put young women as CEO of the day in organizations kind of across the region. Tell us about CEO of the Day and that concept of readiness and helping women step into that next step.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think people sometimes hear CEO of the Day and they think it sounds a bit gimmicky, you know? We select women who show great potential to sit in the seat of the CEO for 24 hours. It's not a shadowing opportunity, so you're not following me around. You are in the seat. And we have the women, you know, in our organization, for example, chair the executive committee meeting. They also meet with clients. They meet employees. They meet stakeholders. So it's a very robust 24 hours. And in doing that, we realized a couple of things. Some of it was planned, some of it not so much. First is the visibility that it gave to that young woman, okay? For many organizations, because we had this year over 100 organizations across 8 countries join us in this program. For many organizations, they found that visibility led to better career advancement. We actually had 2 women who became CEOs, actually, out of that program.
That's incredible.
So visibility and confidence were immediate. They were changed women after that after that CEO of the Day initiative. I think the third thing for the women was just about clarity about what they wanted to do going forward. So those things were fantastic. What I think has been much more important, because we've been doing surveys and learning a lot more about the program, next year will be 5 years of the program.
Wow.
And we started with 7 companies. What I think it's led me to do personally is to challenge the way that we develop. We see it as linear, right? So, you know, you're level 1, then you become a level 2, and then you become a level 3, and then we see you have potential as a manager, and then we, you know, do some development, and then hopefully you become a senior manager and GM and CEO, right? And I'm saying, actually, do we have an opportunity to, you know, sort of, you know, throw that out?
Upset the apple cart, yeah.
Correct. And start with day 1. This program forces you to understand things like decision-making and the weight of the responsibility and what it means to, you know, have to be responsible for employees and the kind of conversations that you have to have with stakeholders. Our CEO of the Day at our company joined our, you know, she chaired our executive committee meeting. which is a very serious strategic meeting. And unfortunately for her, that particular meeting, we had some very difficult decisions to make. And I watched her. So her first meeting in the morning was with some of our partners, right? And in that meeting, she was, just more listening, and she was quiet. And then our executive committee meeting was at 2. And so, we have these presentations and we're having to make very tough decisions. And you could just see, the wheels turning for her. And by the end of the meeting, she was becoming much more direct, like, can we wrap this up, please? I was like, what's happening here, right? But at the end of her program, we had the debriefing, and she said, I just never realized the complexity of the decisions that we have to make in the organization. She had a better appreciation for the way that strategy is put together and the importance of execution. It's hard to teach that so early. It's usually a lived experience that teaches you that. What if we're able to expose that much earlier? How differently will the leaders of tomorrow show up? And that's the thinking that we're having around that. The last point I want to make about CEO of the Day, which is very important, is we're helping women very early on build infrastructure. Today, there are 160 women who have been through that program, and they're all now a big network. A particular CEO of the Day participant 2 years ago was telling me how she wanted to, she's a doctor, and she wanted to do something around breast cancer awareness in a village. And she picked up the phone and she called the women in her cohort to join her, and they went as a team to do that breast cancer awareness. And what she was saying to me is, today I have a network, not only of my fellow CEOs of the Day, but actually I have access to their organizations. Now, we didn't plan that, but it's there now. They have that infrastructure in place for them going forward at a very early age, something that takes you years and years and years to build. So yeah.
100%. And that is the power of that support infrastructure,
Correct.
right? So before we close, one last question from my side. What is, and I'm going to turn the spotlight back on you. As you're sitting here now, it's been a crazy Q1. We are headed into Q2. It's even crazier. When you assess your leadership infrastructure, where do you think you are strong and stable? Where do you think you need to put in a little bit more effort? And what do you think you actually need to park for now?
Can I answer that in a little bit of a different way?
Yeah.
I think that your leadership changes depending on the season. So if you had asked me this, late 2024, early 2025, I would have told you that where I was showing up really weakly was on the support side. Support and restoration, like rest, I'd been through a very difficult 2024. I had, some very difficult decisions I had to deal with. And that was where I was kind of falling apart a little bit, and I needed to fix that. I'm in a growth phase right now. So 2025 was about the book, the podcast, learning about AI and how that, what that means for the organization, trying to get our organization through a difficult period. So I'm in a very growth mindset. So it's all about learning and creating and making sure that I'm ahead of the game and trying to make sure I'm building for the future. So that's where I'm strongest today.
Yeah.
And the point of the book is to say to leaders, you're never going to be 100% on all the floors, right? At every given time, one of the floors is going to require some attention. And so I think that's the way people should look at the book. It's not about perfection. It's about where do you need to focus your attention? How do you strengthen that? So you're not over-reliant on one particular point. Because as I continue to say, willpower and resilience are short-term.
Yeah.
They're very short-term. You need infrastructure.
And I couldn't agree more. Uche, thank you for your generosity.
Thank you.
Thank you for your vulnerability and for this amazing toolkit, because that's really what it is that you've provided us with. I know, as I said many times in this interview, that I've been called out so many times by this book there are flaws that I need to go and fix in my infrastructure. So I just want to thank you so much on behalf of the GIBS community for giving us your time and your intelligence and your wisdom. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. So please feel free to, not feel free, actually must like, subscribe, comment, share this with your GIBS family or GIBS community, and we will be back with more riveting leadership conversations.